Hello students, today we'll discuss about the brain, especially the Sulci and gyri. This is Dr. Yusuf from Higher University, Saudi Arabia. These are the objectives related to this topic. First, we'll try to identify the different lobes of the cerebrum. Then we'll locate and comment on some of the important Sulci and gyri on different surfaces. Then we'll discuss about some of the important functional areas of the cerebral cortex. Then we'll try to demonstrate some of the important structures in the base of the brain, especially the interpedicular fossa. So these are the outlines. We'll be discussing this topic under this following headings. One is we'll talk about the introduction to the brain. Then we'll talk about the surfaces of the cerebrum. Then the third topic will be the sulci and gyri. And the fourth will be the functional areas of the brain, and the fifth will be the structures at the base of the brain. So to begin with, giving a brief introduction to the brain. So the part of the central nervous system which is present within the cranial cavity. As you can see here, this is the cranial cavity within which we have some of the parts of the central nervous system, and that will be called as the brain. And the part of the CNS which will project out of the cranial cavity, as you can see here from the base, so and continues down, and that will be called as the spinal cord. So the part of the central nervous system within the cranial cavity will be called as the brain, and the part which projects out below will be continuing as the spinal cord. Now coming to the main parts of the brain. So how it is classified? It is divided into four brain, where we'll have the main the cerebrum. This is called as the cerebrum, and within deep inside we'll see the diencephalon. And then the midbrain. This is the midbrain here. Then below will be the hindbrain, which includes the pons and the medulla oblongata, as well as the cerebellum. This is the cerebellum. This is the cerebrum, and this is the cerebellum. So first we'll discuss mainly about, in this lecture, we'll mainly discuss about the cerebrum. So this is the major part of the brain. As you can see here, the largest part and the major part of the brain will be the cerebrum. So it is made up of two cerebral hemispheres. What you are seeing here is the left cerebral hemisphere. On the other side, there is one more cerebral hemisphere. So together there will be two cerebral hemispheres, right and left. If you take a coronal section, this is the view where you can see this is the left cerebral hemisphere and the right cerebral hemisphere. These two hemispheres are separated by a deep fissure called as the longitudinal fissure. So this is the longitudinal fissure which separate the left and the right cerebral hemispheres. And the only connection between the right and the left cerebral hemisphere is through a structure called as corpus callosum. Corpus callosum, okay, which is connecting the right cerebral hemisphere with that of the left. If you see the cerebral hemisphere, it has two parts. Outer is the cortex and the inner is the medulla. Outer part is called as the cortex and the inner part is called as the medulla. The outer cortex is made up of the cell bodies of the neurons. Cell bodies of the neurons present here throughout, and this gives it a gray color, and that's why it is called as the gray matter. So the gray matter of the cerebrum. Okay. And then deep inside we have the white matter, which is the medulla. It is mainly made up of the axons as well as the dendrites, and usually these are myelinated, and this gives it a white color. That's why this medulla, in the white fibers, will be called as the white matter. White matter. So the cerebrum has two parts: cortex and medulla, or the gray matter and the white matter. Gray matter outside and the white matter inside. The outer layer is the gray matter, as we said, is thrown into folds, and these are called as the gyri. So if you can see here, these elevations here, These are these folds of the outer cortex, that is the gray matter, is called as gyri. One singular gyrus and multiple, they are called as gyri. And these gyri are separated between the gyri are separated by in between them there are depressions. These are called as the fissures. These fissures are specifically called as sulci. Sulci. So the elevations are called as the gyri, and the depressions are called as the sulci. So these sulci separates the gyri, the elevated part. So what is the use of this arrangement of the sulci and gyri? Why the outer cortex is thrown into fold? So that it can increase the surface area. So as we know, there will be, we'll study later, that there are important centers here. So to increase the surface area so that there can be more surface area to these centers, so this is thrown into folds, and this arrangement will increase the surface area by many times. So there are three large sulci here, which will divide the whole of the cerebrum, east cerebral hemisphere, into four lobes. Four lobes. So what are these three large sulci? One is the central sulcus. Sulcus is the singular, and the plural is the sulci. So this central sulcus, this is the central sulcus here. Here on the lateral surface, this is the superior view of this, the two cerebral hemisphere with the longitudinal fissure here, and this is the lateral view, and here you can see this is called as the central sulcus. So this is the central sulcus one. Then we have the lateral fissure. If the sulcus is deeper, then it will be called as fissure. Here you can see here, this is the lateral fissure. And then we have the posteriorly, we have the parieto-occipital sulcus. These three sulci will divide the whole of the cerebral hemisphere into four lobes. So the four lobes are the frontal lobe here. Then we have, this is called as the parietal lobe. Then we have the occipital lobe, and this is the temporal lobe. So these three sulci will divide the whole of the cerebral, east cerebral hemisphere into four lobes. So what are the lobes? As we said, the first is the frontal lobe here, which is lies in front of the central sulcus here, and above the lateral sulcus. So above the lateral sulcus and in front of the central sulcus. This is called as the frontal lobe. Then we have the second is the parietal lobe, which is above the lateral sulcus, above this is the lateral sulcus here, above the lateral sulcus, and between the central sulcus and the parieto-occipital sulcus. This is the parietal lobe. Then we have the temporal lobe, which is below the lateral fissure or the sulcus or the fissure, whatever we call the lateral fissure. Below the lateral fissure is the temporal lobe. And behind the parieto-occipital sulcus is the occipital lobe, which is behind as well as below the parieto-occipital sulcus. This is the occipital lobe. So these are the four lobes: frontal lobe, parietal lobe, temporal lobe, and occipital lobe. How do you identify the? This is called as the frontal pole, and this is called as the occipital pole. This is the most anterior end. This is the most posterior end. Okay. So whenever you see, you try to trace the lateral fissure, and the lateral fissure always begins from the front, from the anterior part. So this should be the anterior. So this is the frontal lobe. And if there is the cerebellum, then cerebellum is always posterior. This is how you can trace which is the anterior and posterior. This is the cerebellum. So cerebellum is always posterior towards the occipital pole. So here is the occipital lobe. So frontal pole, and this is the frontal lobe, and here always the lateral fissure starts from anterior part. Okay. So this is how you can identify the direction and where is the frontal lobe and the occipital lobe to differentiate. Coming to the borders and surfaces of the cerebral hemispheres. So first we'll talk about the three borders. It has three borders. One is called as the superior-medial border. If you see here, so this is the lateral view. So this is the medial. If you cut these are the two cerebral hemispheres. This is the inferior view. So if you separate the two cerebral hemisphere, so from the medial side, this is how it looks like. So this is the medial surface, and here if you see here, this is called as the superior-medial border. This is the superior-medial border. Then we have, if you see from inferior side, then you can see this is the inferolateral border, and this is this green colored line. This is showing you the inferior-medial border. So this green colored line, this is called is showing you the inferior-medial border on either side, and this is the inferolateral border. This red line is shown here, and this blue colored line is showing you the superior-medial border. So superiorly, we have only one border, superior-medial border, but inferiorly, you can see two borders, inferolateral and inferior-medial borders. So these are the three borders of the cerebral hemisphere, each cerebral hemisphere. Now, coming to the surfaces, there are three surfaces. So this view, what you're seeing, this is called as the superolateral surface. So this is the superolateral surface. The second surface is the medial surface, and this is called as the inferior surface. Inferior surface. Inferior surface has two parts. In the front, this is called as the orbital part, which is sitting on the orbit. Okay, so above the orbit. So this is called as the orbital part, and this is called as the tentorial part. Okay, so the tentorium cerebri will be present just above, just below this. Okay, so this is called as the tentorial surface. So this is the tentorial part, orbital part, and totally this is called as the inferior surface. So there are three surfaces: inferior surface, medial surface, and superolateral surface, and three borders: superior-medial border, superior only one border, and inferiorly there are two: inferolateral and inferior-medial. These are the three borders and three surfaces. Now coming to the important gyri, along with that we'll also study some of the important functional areas in these gyri. Okay, the first gyri will be the precentral gyrus. Precentral gyrus. So this lies just anterior to the central sulcus. We have already seen this is the central sulcus. Just anterior to the central sulcus, what you are seeing, this is called as the precentral gyrus. This elevation just anterior to the central sulcus, this is called as this red colored area, which is shown here. This is called as the precentral gyrus. And this is the very important area. This is called as the primary motor area. Primary motor, this is the main motor area. And a scientist called as Broadman, has classified all these important areas of the brain into different, he has numbered them. And this is the Broadman's area number 4. So Broadman is the scientist who found, and these are the different areas he has classified, and he has numbered this as number 4. So Broadman area number 4. Okay, so this is called as the precentral gyrus, and this is the primary motor areas. Most of the functions of the body are done here, but usually it is on the contralateral side. So what you are seeing here, this is the left side of the precentral gyrus. So it will be controlling the right side of the body. So that is called as the contralateral or the opposite of the body. So it controls the voluntary movements of the opposite side of the body. Why? Because most of the fibers crossed over to the opposite side, especially in the medulla. Okay, medulla oblongata. We'll see that when we study the medulla oblongata. So as I was telling about the fibers, they will be crossing towards the opposite side, and that is called as the decussation. For motor fiber, it is called as motor decussation. For sensory fibers, we'll see later. So that will be called as the sensory decussation, which will be taking place in the medulla oblongata. So if you see the representation of this body on this gyrus, it will be upside down with the feet on the top, and the head part will be here on the lateral side with its respective neurons controlling these parts. So if you see, let me show you the picture. So if you see here, so this is how it looks like. So the face is on the lower part of the superior lateral surface, and if you see above, will be the upper limb, then will be the lower limb. Okay, so this is how the body is represented, and these different parts in the cerebral cortex will be controlling the different parts of the body. Like this part will be controlling the face part, and this will be the upper limb, and here on the medial side will be the lower limb. So this is how the body is represented on the cerebral cortex in the motor area. Okay, so this is how it will be represented. So here is similarly, if you see, this is the sensory part. We'll talk about that. So there, this will be the representation of the body, different parts of the body, and this is also reverse. So this is the sensory representation, and this is called as the motor representation on the precentral gyrus, and this will be on the postcentral gyrus. Okay, we'll talk about that postcentral gyrus later. So this is how the body, especially the motor parts of the body, are controlled, and these are the different areas of the cerebral cortex, how they are represented. Now coming to the post-central gyrus. So this is the post-central gyrus. Here also you can see the representation of the body. So the head is in the lower part. So this part of the cerebral cortex will be controlling especially the motor movements here, and the upper limb. Then you can see the lower limb, especially on the medial side. Now we are talking about this part. This is called as the post-central gyrus. So this is the central sulcus. Just behind that, the gyrus is called as the postcentral gyrus, lies behind the central sulcus and is known as the primary sensory area. This is the primary motor area, and this is the primary sensory area of the brain. Neurons in this part receive sensation from the opposite side of the body, such as touch, pain, temperature, and pressure. Especially the touch, pain, temperature, and pressure, the sensation will be received in this part. Okay, so because they sensory, so the different parts of the body will receive sensation from, and this will be the representation of the body. And again, from the opposite side, because even there will be sensory deposition in the, especially the medulla oblongata of the fibers. So this part will be, this is the left side of the brain, so it will be receiving from the right side of the body the sensation, especially the touch, pain, temperature, and pressure. So this is called as the post-central gyrus. Post-central. This is the precentral gyrus, which is the primary motor area. This is the post-central gyrus, which is the primary sensory area. Now coming to the temporal, superior temporal gyrus, which lies below the lateral sulcus. This is the lateral sulcus here, just below the lateral sulcus. This is called the superior temporal gyrus. Lies below the lateral sulcus, and the middle part of this gyrus is called as the auditory area. Not shown here. This is how it is present. Okay, so let me show the next picture. Here you can see this is called as the hearing area or auditory area, as it is where the reception and interpretation of the sound takes place. So this is for the area for audition or hearing, and this is classified by Brodmann as Brodmann area number 41 and 42. Then coming to some other important functional areas of the brain, like the Broca's area, motor speech area. This is called the Broca's area, motor speech area, lies just above the lateral sulcus. So hearing, we saw it is present on the temporal lobe in the superior temporal gyrus. This is the superior temporal gyrus, and here was the auditory area or hearing area, and this was below the lateral sulcus, and now what we are seeing is above the lateral sulcus in the frontal lobe. This is called as the Broca's area, motor speech area, which especially control the movements of the speech, and it is dominant in the left hemisphere in the right-handed person, and it is vice versa. So it is in case of the right-handed person, most of the people are right-handed, and it will be dominated on the left hemisphere. Then coming to the visual area, a very important area lies near the posterior pole. Where is the posterior pole? This is the anterior pole here in the frontal lobe. Posterior pole is the occipital lobe. Near the occipital lobe, in the occipital lobe, near the posterior pole, especially near the calcarine sulcus. We'll see the calcarine sulcus later. So this area is called as the visual area, especially on the it is both on the lateral side as well as on the medial surface also. So this area is called as the visual area, and the area Brodmann's area number 17. Okay, receives visual impressions, and it continues beyond that area. Not only this area, this area around that, this is all called as the visual association area, and involve the area number 18 and 19 also. Okay, especially for the visual interpretation. Okay, so this will be especially for the primary visual area, where the visual impressions are received in the area 17, and 18 and 19 are for the interpretation. So this whole area is called as the visual association area, and this is called as the visual cortex visual area. Then coming to the, just like we had the visual area and the association area, similarly we have the premotor area, which is called as the motor function area. So it is larger than the what we saw the primary area and the Broca's area. Okay, so this is called as the premotor area in front of the primary area, primary motor area, and this is mainly on the frontal lobe. Okay, so located anterior to the motor area. So here is the primary motor area. Anterior to that will be the premotor area. Occupies posterior part of the superior medial as well as the inferior gyri, frontal gyri. So here will be superior, this is the middle, and the inferior frontal gyri. Within that will be the premotor area. Area in the superior and middle of frontal gyri correspond to Brodmann's area number 6 and 8. 6 and 8. And the area in the inferior frontal gyrus corresponds to area 44 and 45, which is called as the Broca's area, motor speech area, Broca's area. So this will be area number 44 and 45. And the other premotor area will be the area number 6 and 8. So this whole area will be called as the premotor area, and this whole area, including the primary motor area, this will be called as the motor functional area. Okay, so which include the primary motor area as well as the premotor area, including the Broca's area of speech. So this Broca's area is the motor area speech. So what about the sensory area of speech? So that is called as the Wernicke's area. So Wernicke's area is here. So this is the sensory speech area. So Broca's area is the motor speech area, and the Wernicke's area is the sensory speech area. It is the sensory area of speech present over the superior temporal gyrus. We saw the superior temporal gyrus. This is the superior temporal gyrus. We saw the auditory area. Behind that is the Wernicke's area of speech, which is nothing but the sensory speech area. Broca's area is the motor speech area, and the Wernicke's area is the sensory speech area. And this is the area number 22 on the Brodmann scale. Now coming to other some of the important sulci and gyri on the superior lateral surface. As we already saw the central sulcus, and we also saw the precentral gyri and the postcentral gyri. And just in front of the precentral gyrus is the precentral sulcus, and behind the postcentral gyrus is the postcentral sulcus. Now coming to the other parts within the frontal lobe. Okay, which I showed. One is the precentral sulcus, which is parallel to the central sulcus, and in front of that, this area has two important sulci. One is the superior frontal and the inferior frontal sulcus. So this in the frontal lobe will divide the frontal lobe into superior frontal gyrus, middle frontal gyrus, as well as the inferior frontal gyrus. As we saw the inferior frontal gyrus, we saw the Broca's area, speech area. Okay, so there are two important sulci in the frontal lobe: superior frontal sulcus and the inferior frontal sulcus, which divide the frontal lobe into superior frontal gyri, middle frontal gyri, and the inferior frontal gyri. Similarly, if you see the temporal lobe, we already saw the superior temporal gyrus. So actually, there are two important sulci, just like here. There are two sulci here. These are called as superior and inferior temporal because it is in the temporal area. Here they are called as frontal because they are present in the frontal area, and here these are called as temporal because they are present in the temporal. Superior temporal sulcus and the inferior temporal sulcus, which divide the temporal lobe into superior temporal gyrus, middle temporal gyrus, as well as the inferior temporal gyrus. So there are three gyrus and two sulci. Similarly, here also there are two sulci and three gyri. Okay. Similarly, if you go to the parietal lobe, behind the central sulcus is the postcentral gyrus we saw. Behind the postcentral gyrus, parallel to the central sulcus, is the postcentral sulcus. This is the postcentral sulcus parallel to the central sulcus. Here was the precentral sulcus. Now we are seeing the postcentral sulcus. And there is one important sulcus called as the infraparietal sulcus, which divide the parietal lobe into superior and inferior parietal lobules, because they are not exactly like gyrus here. So that's why they're called as lobules, larger area. If there are larger area, then we call it as the lobules. Smaller than the lobes, those are called as the lobules. So superior parietal lobule and the inferior parietal lobule. Now finally coming to the occipital lobe, here we have one important sulcus called as the lateral occipital sulcus. This is the lateral occipital sulcus which divide this occipital lobe into superior and inferior occipital gyri. Superior and inferior occipital gyri. And along with that, we can also see a lunate sulcus, behind which will be the primary visual area. Then also we can see the arcus parieto-occipital occipitalis, you can call, or the lobule or gyrus or whatever you call. Okay, so this is in the occipital lobe. So these are some of the important areas, sulci and gyri in the frontal lobe, the parietal lobe, temporal lobe, and the occipital lobe. Now coming to the medial surface, this was all seen on the superior lateral surface. Okay, we are discussing all these important functional areas as well as the gyri and the sulci were seen on the superior lateral surface. Now we are going to the medial surface of the cerebral hemisphere. So this is the medial surface. This is how it looks like when we separate the two cerebral hemispheres on the medial side. So here we see a very important structure called the corpus callosum. So this is an arch structure containing the commissural fibers. What are commissural fibers? Commissural fibers are nothing but the fibers which are connecting the two important identical areas in the two cerebral hemisphere. From one cerebral hemisphere, similar identical area is connected to the opposite cerebral hemisphere through the commissural fibers. Actually, there are three types of fibers. One is called the association fibers, then the projection fibers, and the commissural fibers. Three different types of fibers you can see in the brain, especially in the cerebral hemisphere. What are association fibers? They are nothing but the fiber that interconnect the different regions of the cerebral cortex. They interconnect the different regions from one region. If you want to connect one region to the other region, it is interconnected by those fibers will be called as the association fibers. Then we have projection fibers, which are connecting the cerebral cortex area, some important areas outside, to the inner gray matter. Okay, some important nuclei. So that will be called as from the outside to the important nuclei inside, like the thalamus we will discuss here. So if there are connection between the cerebral cortex to the thalamus or other nuclei, that will be called as the projection fibers. But this is called as the commissural fibers. What are commissural fibers? The fibers which connect one identical area of the cerebral hemisphere to the other similar identical area on the other cerebral hemisphere. That is called as the commissural fibers. So this is the only connection between the one cerebral hemisphere to the other cerebral hemisphere through the commissural fibers. So it is cut here so that you can see the different parts of the corpus callosum. So this is called as the corpus callosum. So it has four parts. So the most anterior part, this is called as the rostrum. Then the bent part, that is called as the genu. Wherever there is bend, that will be called as the genu. and this is the trunk or the body, and the most posterior part will be called as the splenium. So genu is the most anterior part. Okay, because of the bend, you can see. So this will be the most anterior part, and the splenium will be most posterior part. And this is the trunk, and the rostrum will be below. So these are the four important parts of the corpus callosum. So the third ventricle is present just below the this corpus callosum. So here will be the third ventricle. Okay, and the thalamus form the lateral wall of this ventricle. So you'll see later this is the called as the thalamus. So that will be forming the lateral wall for the third ventricle. Now, coming after this is the corpus callosum we already saw. Now, we have to see some other important sulci and gyri. So, there is something called as the cingulate sulcus. Cingulate sulcus. If you see here, so this sulcus runs parallel to the corpus callosum. So, here is the corpus callosum. This is the corpus callosum. Parallel to the corpus callosum, we can see a sulcus. This is called as the cingulate sulcus. And the gyrus between the cingulate sulcus and the corpus callosum, this is called as the cingulate gyrus. So this is the elevation. So this is called as the cingulate gyrus, and this depression above that, that will be called as the cingulate sulcus. Then the corpus callosum is separated from the cingulate gyrus by a sulcus here. This is called as the callosal sulcus. Callosal sulcus between the corpus callosum and the cingulate gyrus is a sulcus here which separate the two by something called as the callosal sulcus. So callosal sulcus. Then if you go behind, if you see only the central sulcus will be going from completely, it covers on the lateral side. So it will be on the lateral side, clearly visible on the superior lateral surface, and it invaginates on the medial side. Okay, on the medial side. So this area, this is the central sulcus invaginating on the medial side, and the area around that, this is called the paracentral lobule. Okay, lobule, as I said, smaller than a lobe, that will be called a lobule. So this is called as the and larger than the gyrus. So this is called as the paracentral lobule. A small area around the central sulcus. So here you can see the central sulcus coming on the medial side. This is the only sulcus which will be coming all the way from the lateral side to the medial side, and you can easily trace it on the medial side. So, and the area around that will be called as the paracentral lobule. The gyrus superior to the cingulate sulcus. So this will be called as the medial frontal lobule. Medial frontal gyrus. Sorry. So this is called as the medial frontal gyrus. Just in front of the central cingulate sulcus. Okay. So just in front as well as above also. So this whole gyrus is called as the medial frontal gyrus. Then going behind, this area will be called as the cuneus. It is a triangular area between the parieto-occipital sulcus, which we already saw, and there is one more important sulcus here called as the calcarine sulcus. Between the parieto-occipital sulcus and the calcarine sulcus, this area is called as cuneus. And above the cuneus is the precuneus. Just anterior and above to the cuneus will be called as this. This is called as the precuneus. Okay. So these are some of the important sulci and gyri on the medial surface. Now coming to the inferior surface. So as I said before, the inferior surface is divided into two parts: orbital surface as well as the tentorial surface. Orbital surface as well as the tentorial surface. So on the orbital surface, if you see here, so this is called as the olfactory nerve here with the olfactory bulb and the olfactory tract. Okay, so from the olfactory bulb, there will be small olfactory nerves which will be projecting into the roof of the nose. Okay, so this is called the olfactory bulb and the tract. Deep to this olfactory bulb and tract, if you lift it, then you can see this sulcus. This is called as the olfactory sulcus because the olfactory tract is sitting on that. That's why it is called as the olfactory sulcus. The gyrus rectus is medial to the olfactory sulcus. Medial to that, so this area on either side, This is called as the gyrus rectus. And lateral to this olfactory sulcus, there is one H-shaped orbital sulcus. This is called as the orbital sulcus, which is H-shaped, and this will divide the whole of the remaining part of the orbital surface into anterior, posterior, median, and lateral orbital gyri. Anterior orbital gyri, medial, lateral, and posterior orbital, because this is the orbital surface in the inferior surface, so it is called as the orbital gyri. Okay, so this are the some of the important areas on the orbital surface. Now coming to the tentorial surface. Tentorial surface. So here there are two important sulci. One is called as the collateral sulcus. If you see here, so this is called as the collateral sulcus, and here we can see one more sulcus. This is called as the occipitotemporal sulcus. Occipitotemporal sulcus. This is the collateral sulcus, and this is the occipitotemporal sulcus. This will divide the inferior surface into three important areas. One is called as the parahippocampus gyrus. So this is the parahippocampal gyrus. So this is can be seen only in the front. Here medially it has invaginated deep inside, so you cannot see. It's not yet continuous all the way. Okay. So here you can see this is the parahippocampal gyrus. So this is the area, this violet area which has been shown on either side. So this is called as the parahippocampal. Sorry, this is the parahippocampal gyrus. Then we have this sulcus. This is called as the collateral sulcus. Then deep to that, this one area has been invaginated inside. That is called as the medial, and this is the lateral occipitotemporal gyrus. Actually, it is not the parahippocampal gyrus invaginated, but the medial, and this is the lateral occipitotemporal gyrus. So these are the three areas. One is this is the parahippocampal gyrus. Then we have the medial and the lateral occipitotemporal gyrus, which are the three areas, important gyrus on the inferior surface, especially the tentorial surface. Tentorial surface. Okay. So there are three areas. This is the parahippocampal gyrus. Then we have the medial and lateral occipitotemporal gyrus. And two sulci. One is the collateral sulci, the collateral. Then we have the occipitotemporal sulcus. So these are the two important sulcus on the tentorial surface. So these are some of the important areas on the inferior surface. Okay. Then coming to some of the deep structures which are present, we will not go into detail because it will be a separate class where we'll discuss that. One is the ventricles. What are ventricles? These are nothing but the cavities filled with CSF. Okay, so there are three ventricles. Actually, there are four ventricles. Two lateral ventricles on either side. Each cerebral hemisphere will have one lateral ventricle. On the second, it will be the second lateral ventricle. So there are two lateral ventricles, and then below that, this is the third ventricle, and here is the fourth ventricle. So these ventricles are filled with CSF and the two lateral ventricles. This is the one lateral ventricle, this is the other lateral. Lateral ventricle has different parts. This is called as the anterior horn. This is the body of the lateral horn. This is called as the posterior horn, and this is called as the inferior horn. So this is the anterior horn, body, posterior horn, and the inferior horn. These are the different parts of the lateral ventricle. These two lateral ventricles on either side will drain through into the fourth ventricle through something called as the interventricular foramen. Interventricular foramen drains the lateral ventricle, the CSF in the lateral ventricles into the third ventricle, and the third ventricle drains into the fourth ventricle through something called as the cerebral aqueduct. Cerebral aqueduct. This is the cerebral aqueduct, and here is the interventricular foramen. So the collections of the gray matter of the cell bodies of the neurons, it is not only on the surface, but also on the cortex, but also deep inside within the white matter. And this collection of gray matters within the white matter deep inside, those are called as the nuclei. So there are some important nuclei. One of them is called as the diencephalon. It's a large collection of gray matter deep under the cerebrum. Okay. So it is made up of mainly about the thalamus and the hypothalamus. So thalamus is a very important structure within the diencephalon. We'll not go into details. As I said, it will have a separate class in that. So that will be the where we'll discuss about thalamus and hypothalamus. So just we'll briefly tell you here. So thalamus is a important relay station for afferent sensory pathway going to the cerebral cortex. So all the sensory paths will relay into this thalamus. Here you can see that this is the thalamus, this is the corpus callosum, and below the corpus callosum you can see here this is the thalamus, and here is the hypothalamus. So thalamus is a very very important sensory relay station, as it is said, afferent neurons, okay, afferent sensory pathway, and it is important relay station. Finally from here it will be the fibers from thalamus will be going to the, as we saw, the post central gyrus, which is the primary sensory area. So it formed the lateral wall for the third ventricle. This thalamus will be forming the lateral wall for the third ventricle. As we saw, here is the third ventricle. So it will be forming the lateral wall for the third ventricle. The hypothalamus also formed the wall for the lateral ventricle as well as the floor for the third ventricle. And from here, if you go down, here this is the midbrain, which connect the forebrain with that of the hindbrain. Hindbrain is here, which include the pons, medulla oblongata, and the cerebellum. Okay. Finally, coming to the structures under the base of the brain. So this is the base of the brain here. What are the structures which are under the base of the brain? So one of the very important area which we will discuss is the interpedicular fossa. So if you cut the midbrain, and you can see this is the, if you take a section like this from here, so if you take a section here at the base of the brain, okay, so this is the midbrain. So if you see the same, here is the midbrain cut, and if you cut the midbrain and view from the cerebrum from below, then you can see one very important area. This is called as the interpedicular fossa. So it is nothing but a depressed area anterior to the midbrain. So anterior to the midbrain, this one, okay, and bordered anterior by the optic chiasma. So optic nerve is here, optic chiasma, and this is the optic tract. So here anteriorly with the optic chiasma, and laterally we have the optic tract. So on either side, optic tract, and behind we have the midbrain. So this area in between the optic chiasma in the front, behind we have the midbrain, and lateral side it is bounded by the optic tract. This area is called as it's a very small area that is called as interpedicular fossa, but very important area. Within this fossa, we can see two rounded swellings. These are called as the mammillary bodies. Behind the mammillary bodies and in front of the midbrain, so you can see a very small area. This is called as the posterior perforating substance between the mammillary bodies and the midbrain, showing the perforation of the numerous small vessels. When you study the blood supply, at that time you see there is something called a circle of Willis, and from there are a lot of perforating fibers that are, those are called as striated fibers. Will be these are nothing but the striated blood vessels which will be supplying the deep part, the white fibers, the white matter of the brain. So they will be piercing here through this area. So there are multiple small vessels. So they are perforating here. So that's what is called as the perforating substance. So this will be called as the posterior perforating substance between the mammillary bodies and the midbrain. And there is one more area. This is called as the anterior perforating substance. This is lateral to the optic chiasma, and it is bounded anteriorly by the olfactory striae. This is called as the olfactory. This is the olfactory tract, and this is called as the olfactory stria. Okay, and bounded posteriorly by this area is called as the uncus. So this is the anterior perforating substance, and this is the posterior perforating substance. Okay, finally, coming to one more structure called as the tuberculum cinereum. It is nothing but a narrow funnel-shaped structure that gives attachment to the hypophysis cerebri. This is the hypophysis cerebri. It is also called as the pituitary gland. So this is the pituitary gland, and here will be the thalamus and hypothalamus, and here this funnel-shaped structure. This is called as the tuber cinereum, or it is also called as the infundibulum. Optic tract winds around the midbrain. You can see here, this is the optic tract on either side, winds around the midbrain and terminates posteriorly into four swellings called as the medial and lateral geniculate body. Medial and lateral geniculate bodies. This is the lateral geniculate body and the medial geniculate body on one side, and similarly there will be a lateral medial geniculate body on the other side. So this optic tract will be actually invaginating into this medial lateral geniculated bodies on either side. So this is all we studied here. So what would be, just to revise? So we studied the introduction to the brain and some of the important features of the brain. Then we studied about the surfaces and the borders of the cerebrum. Then we studied some of the important sulci and gyri, as well as some of the important functional areas of the brain. Finally, we studied the structure at the base of the brain, especially the intervertebral fossa. So if you have any questions, you can write back to me so that I can reply whenever it is possible. So these are all my references. Thank you very much.